Hello everyone, this is Robert with Team Copperhead and welcome to the very first fight recap video for the 2020 season of BattleBots. Our very first fight of the season was against Gigabyte. There's going to be a lot of spoilers in this video, so go ahead and watch the episode and then come back and we'll discuss the fight. I think it goes without saying that the 2020 season of BattleBots is going to be very unique. It's unique in the fact that we filmed this whole thing during a pandemic, so a lot of teams couldn't show up. The teams that could show up had to go through quite a bit of hoops. We had to get a test before we left. We got 2 tests as soon as we showed up, and then we were tested throughout the filming. So there was a little bit of added stress and just kind of anxiety and uncertainty that was going on during filming. And then when they announced the matchups, our very first matchup being against Gigabyte, we weren't thrilled. I mean, just to say the least. We have had issues with horizontals in the past, mainly the Kronos fight that we had from last year, split us open, killed the drum, killed the drive. So we fixed that, and if you watch my preview video that I had previously, we end up doing that crossbar in the middle. You can very clearly see that on the video when you watch this episode. And we thought that would help, but we were still really unsure. Gigabyte is still spinning a 120-pound shell, and it can catch the edge, it can catch a wheel, it can do all sorts of different things. So we were a little uncertain going into this fight. The other interesting thing is you show up, you're all prepared, and then very first fight is a horizontal. There's only a few horizontals out of the, 80 or whatever bots, and so we didn't have that bar welded on, so we had to strip the bots apart, put them back together, put that bar on there, kind of last minute. So it was a little bit stressful going into this first event. We were really uncertain of how we would handle it. In the pre-fight interview, Zach mentions that Gigabyte's teeth were a little higher than normal, and I thought this was an interesting choice, and we didn't really get a chance to discuss it with them afterwards, but they have many, many shells. Some of them have inserts, some of them have, the teeth welded on, and the teeth are actually at varying heights, so I'm kind of interested why they chose the slightly higher teeth, which would really just ride up that wedge and give us a perfect thing to grab onto. So I'm not 100% sure why they chose to do that, but that actually ended up being very beneficial for us. So speaking about strategy, I don't think there's really that much to talk about in this fight. You've obviously seen it, so you kind of know how it goes. Our strategy going into the Gigabyte fight was to box rush, get an early hit on them, and then just kind of stay on them and keep hitting them. Very reminiscent of the Witch Doctor fight from last year. So if you look very closely, you can see that I'm actually operating the weapon and Zach is operating the drive. We have the trainer port connection, so that allows us to be able to control the weapon completely separately. Zach can focus strictly on driving so that we can get that box rush, and I can focus on getting that weapon up to speed. And that actually ended up working out pretty well. I was apparently a little late on the trigger on the start. You can see that we started driving before that drum started going. But I wanted to make sure that we didn't just peg the drum and then it would do the kind of flutter flicker thing. I wanted to make sure that I eased it up nice and smooth so that I was confident that it was spinning by the time we got to the other side of the box, and that ended up happening. So that was good. That was one of those nervous, stressful moments where you have one job. All you have to do is this. But the lights are going, it's your first fight, there's COVID everywhere, and you're just kind of wanting to do that, but you get nervous, you get kind of flustered, and the countdown happens and you're like, oh, and you push it too fast, something like that. Ended up being perfectly fine, and this year's Copperhead really isn't that sensitive to those things. The weapon is fantastic, and you'll see that throughout the season. We really didn't have any issues with that, but we struggled with that all last season, so that was definitely a nervous moment for myself. So let's talk a little bit about drive. I think that's the elephant in the room here. In the beginning of the match, you can see Gigabyte saying, oh, the floor is like ice, and we're kind of sliding around a little bit. The BattleBox floor this year was actually quite good. Traction is never really that good in these scenarios because, quite frankly, we actually kind of shave down the floor and we smooth it out. If you watch very closely, you can see that front lip of Copperhead actually scraping away the paint. With this cross member that we have up front, we're actually scraping quite a bit. One, we didn't anticipate that much friction on the front. We didn't test these cross members because you physically have to weld the bot together to get this cross member in. And when that is welded in place, the only way to service the bot and get it apart is to cut it off and cut the bot apart. So we didn't do any testing with the drive. We figured it would add quite a bit of resistance, which it did, but we really didn't get a lot of driving practice, and it did actually create a little bit more traction issues with us because so much weight is on that front end. With Gigabyte, I'm going to speak for them a little bit right here. They have a inner platform and then the shell goes around that. When they try and spin up the shell, you've got two options. The shell can spin or the bottom can spin. And if you don't have a lot of good traction, or if you're trying to spin up that shell too much with too much torque, then just the bottom will spin. And there's definitely cases in this fight where you can see that their bottom is spinning and the shell really isn't going. So they really need to ease that up in much the same way that we do to get the shell spinning without having the bottom spinning. And once they have a little bit of momentum, then it's easy to kind of crank it up and get it up to full speed. But that's always an issue with a large shell spinner is if you have too much torque getting that shell going, you might end up just spinning your base around, and that was the problem that they had. Now, that's not the only drive problem that we saw with Copperhead. As I mentioned previously, we had to kind of swap the bots around. We have two bots, and we kind of had to swap them around, weld on the bar, and do all that good stuff. In the process of doing this, we actually mismatched two of the drive sides. The bots are identical, but what we learned immediately after this fight is the drive motor and the drive ESC, they kind of have a pairing, if you will. They need to talk properly with these sensors. So long story short, the motors that we're using don't really have a reliable enough sensor with the VESC speed controller that we're using. So if one of those kind of got mismatched, they just didn't really talk well. So we actually swapped out a bunch of motors, swapped out a bunch of VESCs, and found the right combination. And then we labeled those, and we actually had them labeled on the physical robot. You know, this is good, this is bad, this is a good combo. And that was actually a lot of testing. Immediately after this fight, we grabbed the bot, we went straight into the test arena and did a bunch of testing, and that's what we found out. We found out with this version of Copperhead that if we drove it into the wall, if we drove it around, it was perfectly fine. But as soon as we drove it into the wall or there was any load against it, the wheels would actually cut out. And we didn't throw any error codes. There was no issue happening. It was just really unable to read the sensor feedback from the motors, and it was just unable to translate the drive. So once we swapped out some motors, we corrected that issue, and we literally took the bot in the test box, drove it into the wall, and spun the wheels for like a minute, minute and a half just to see if anything would cut out. And we ultimately fixed that issue, but it was the horizontal bar, welding that on and kind of swapping the motors. We had known good, but as soon as we kind of started swapping the sides, then we were left with one known good and one not. And if you watch this closely, you can see that our wheels just aren't turning right. And once we kind of went in one direction, they kind of kicked back in. But then as soon as they had any load against them, pushing against the bot, hitting the wall, or even turning kind of puts a little bit of a load on them, then they would kind of cut out. So this was an issue that we just, didn't anticipate, didn't figure out, but we fixed it for the next match. And finally, the big hit. We were, ever since we built Copperhead, we've been waiting for a hit like this. So it was really satisfying to have this happen in the very first fight of the season. We finally got the weapon dialed in. I keep pointing over here because that's where Copperhead's sitting. It's not going to be on camera because there might be some spoilers, there might be some cosmetic damage that might give away some future fights, so it's not going to make an appearance just yet. But we wanted this to happen. That was the ideal circumstance. You can go 3 minutes with Gigabyte and they can just keep hitting and hitting and hitting. Popping the top off is just obviously the easiest way to just end this fight and make it stop. So we're very lucky that this happened. And they actually came out with a post the day or so ago after the fight happened, saying that they actually used the spindle assembly from the fight that they fought with Witch Doctor. I'm not really sure why they did that. They are probably questioning why they did that. In their fight last year with Witch Doctor, they were getting popped up in the air over and over and over. It stressed and weakened that center spindle column, and we ended up just kind of finishing it off. I am not at all sure why you would put in a bot that had been thrown in the air so many times and had that stressed so much against yet again another vertical spinner. And our drum is heavier than theirs. I think our tip speed is a little bit less, but we hit relatively hard, as you can see, and I'm not really sure why you would put an already pre-stressed component in there. If they were fighting a horizontal, that might be a different story, but this is that same kind of force and that same kind of stress. So, you know, an interesting thing about combat robots is 50% of the fight is won in the arena, and the other 50% is won outside of it. Preparation, you know, I mean, our drive wasn't working, you know, that's on us. You got to kind of know what you're going into and build the right configuration, make sure all the right things are working. So I think that was an interesting choice by them, and that ended up costing them the match. They put in a pre-stressed component that wasn't able to handle the forces that Copperhead was dishing out. So I think that's all I had to discuss for this episode. Of course, if you have any other questions, you can post down below in the comments, or if you look down in the description, you can find the link to our Facebook page so you can ask us more questions there. As always, thanks for watching, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for this year. We've got Avid CNC, eGauge Systems, L&L Fabrication, and of course, Rocky Mountain Waterjet. Without them, Copperhead would not be possible, so yeah, go visit the links down below and maybe go buy some stuff. As always, thanks for watching. See you in the next video.